Hello there. You're listening to 10 Questions, where we discuss the wet plate collodion process and the photographers that create these unique images known as ambrotypes and tintypes. I'm your host, Chad Shryock, wet plate photographer for Pork Pie Photography based in Fort Collins, Colorado. In each episode, I've asked a modern-day practitioner to sit down with me and talk about how they got involved with this vintage process, share some information on their gear and studio, and provide some valuable insights into their creative process. So whether you're just beginning to dabble your toes in the collodion ethers, or you're a seasoned silverbath expert, hang on and see what develops with 10 Questions. In this episode, I've asked a seasoned wet plater who's known for taking captivating images of Native Americans, organizing large-scale creative photographs with the involvement of hundreds of people, and just a few years back designed his own full natural light studio. I've had the pleasure to meet this collodionist a couple of times in his different studios and see his work process up close. For our inaugural guest, I'd like to welcome Shane Balkowitsch to the program. Hi, Shane. How you doing?
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate having me on.
Great. So, Shane, you're one of a handful of wet platers that I've actually met over the years. Probably starting back in about 2016, I went back and looked to see the first time that I met in your first studio there, and I think again in 2018. So.
I'm looking over my right shoulder on the shelf, and there's a bottle of whiskey that you had made. People come in and see that bottle, and it entices them, and we've had a pull from it over the years.
I bet. Well, eventually we'll get the chance to do a refill on that guy.
That'd be great.
So when I was putting together the questions for this episode, I realized that I probably know about you and your work more than any of the other guests that will be on the show, just because I've actually got to meet you and interact with you quite a bit. I also know that you've probably done dozens of these types of interviews, so hopefully we can talk a little bit more technical and provide the listeners with some new details that they may not know. So
fantastic.
So we'll start with the basics first. So, Shane, please tell us about yourself and what stirred your interest in wet plate photography.
I was online in 2012 and saw a wet plate. Did not know it was a wet plate at the time. I saw a wet plate of a gentleman, and I inquired about what it was. He explained to me what it was, and I just fell down this rabbit hole. There was something intrinsically about that drew me to this image, and I just, as a non-photographer at that time in my life, I didn't even own a camera. The story is pretty well known, and I just started chasing this and trying to figure out what it takes to make a studio and what a darkroom was. I had never stepped foot in a darkroom. The first darkroom I'd ever been in is the one that I made myself, my makeshift darkroom in my old warehouse. So, I've just been chasing it ever since. So October 4th, 2012. So I just celebrated a decade of doing this, and I've made I think 4,428 plates in the last 10 years.
Wow, that's crazy. Can you describe yourself without even mentioning anything about photography anymore?
No, and it's really. I was 42 at the time, and it took me some years, but at one point, it occurred to me that this is what I was always meant to do. So for me, never being a photographer, never being an artist, never having any sort of creative talent whatsoever or outlet in my life, to find myself chasing this and seeing where it could lead is it's been so very rewarding. I can't describe it. So, but this is my passion. I am a business person as well, but that for some years now has taken a backseat to what I do down here in the studio.
That's great. So it's been a while, and you've kind of stepped into this process, I guess, unexperienced. I mean, you mentioned that you'd never owned a camera or anything. Tell me about your first plate and how that experience went.
Well, I didn't know that I would get anything. And as a person that's practiced yourself, you've known many wet plate photographers that takes weeks or months even to get some kind of image that you can even ascertain what's on the plate, right?
Yeah.
And I took my brother's wet plate on that day, plate number 1, and I've numbered every plate ever since. They've all been labeled and numbered and indexed and archived. And his image came out, so you can about imagine how excited I was to actually get something that looked like my brother on the plate. And on the anniversary every year of that date, October 4th, we do another plate. We take his shirt off. He's got a black backdrop. I shoot the same 5x7 format. And so I have this series called My Brother Through the Years. And I've got 11 plates right now of my brother as he's growing older with me.
Yep, that's great. It seems like for folks that are getting started in this process, their family are really the ones that get to bear the brunt of sitting in the chair the most. So
absolutely, especially when you're learning, you don't want to, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but you know how fickle this process can be, even for people that are seasoned in it. So, you want to have people that are patient, and if everything goes sideways on you, it's really no harm, no foul. It's not the case when Evander Holyfield stepped in my studio, or Deb Halland, or all the people that have come in over the years. It's a completely different thing, and at that point you want to have some kind of experience under your belt so that you can perform the best that you can during those moments, because you only have these people. I only had Greta Thunberg for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's just not enough time, as you know, but you do what you can.
So I was looking back. I made my first plate in March of 2016, okay. And I met you 5 months later, and we actually took a photograph of each other in your, I guess, your first studio.
Yep, my makeshift studio.
Your makeshift studio. And for me, that was plate number 49. And I think at that time you were already at almost 2,000 plates. So you
seems right. And I keep track, and like the year before last, I made 300 plates, almost to the number. And then this last in 2022, I think I made 400 plates. So and I'm working just to let the listener know, I'm working every Friday. And you're just making 300 to 400 exposures a year, and it seems like I'm very, very busy.
Yep. So Shane, tell me a little bit about your experience in actually learning the process. I mean, what was the mechanics that you went through to actually figure out how to create that first plate?
Well, I went online and started doing searches for wet plate artists, and John Coffer came up, upstate New York. And I was reading over his website, and he had what he calls his doer's guide, and he still sells this. And I ordered it. It was like $75. He lives in a cabin with no phone or any internet or like that. And you send him the money, and then this typewritten manual in a binder comes to your door, and you can order it in handwritten or typed. And I figured I didn't want to spend so much time reading his handwriting, so I got the typed version, and I just started with a highlighter on the couch, just every night, and making it a list of everything that I needed to, all from all the chemistry to a lens and a camera and the darkroom lights and all the beakers and all the flasks and everything that we use to make these plates. I just made a laundry list of stuff that I needed, and I just quickly started ordering everything.
How long do you think it was before, after you received the doer's guide? 45 days.
45 days, yep. About 45 days and that was to have a camera built and everything from Star Camera Company, a 5x7 bellows camera. So, it was about 45 days. I remember waiting for the camera that was like the last. Had everything, I had everything that I thought I needed.
Ready to go.
And then I just sit there waiting for a camera to arrive. Like I don't even have a camera to test anything on. So I remember that was the last element. And once that did, I called my brother back to the warehouse, and we went for that first exposure.
So you shoot primarily portraits using this process. How did you decide to focus in that area? I mean, was that something that you had in mind when you started the process?
No, but it's the human condition. So, and of all these 4,400 plates or so that I've made, 99.9% of them have human eyes in them. So, you're right. I'm a portrait artist through and through. There's and I'm gonna just give you my slant on it. Why you're asking me why I'm a portrait artist versus like a landscape artist or something, and this is just me, not to upset anyone or anything, but when you see, we've all seen examples of these when these plates last 100, 200, 300, 400 years, but I've got examples of 170-year-old plates in my studio here, and you look at these plates, and most of the time the photographer didn't take the time to document who the person was in the picture, or even document that they were the person that took the photograph, or even the date or anything. And you always wonder, what did that person do and what was their life like? There's some connection there between the viewer of the plate and the person on the plate. So, I've done a couple of landscapes, and a landscape conifer tree is a conifer tree 150 years from now. But that you can't say that about a human. There's something intrinsically unique and special about every person, and there's a story behind every person, whether or not you get to know the full story. But I like that. I like the fact that these things, these objects that we're creating, will be here long after I'm gone, and it gives me a lot of reassurance. So it's just what I gravitated towards. It wasn't any decision at all. It's just, what was I going to take a picture of in my studio to start? Well, my brother's standing there, so that's kind of how I fell into portrait work. It was nothing more magical than that.
Yeah, and I like that you, from the start, kept track of every photo, labeled every photo.
Kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why did a person that just picked up a camera start labeling plate 1 with the date and the subject and the date of birth and by Shane Balkowitsch, Nostalgic Glass Wet Plate Studio, Bismarck, North Dakota? Why would someone do that? Yeah. It's very strange.
Well, I did the exact same thing from the start, and one of the reasons that I think maybe I got into that is, I have seen a lot of family photographs. Mm-hmm. And you look at them, and like you said, there's no names. You don't know when it was taken. Mm-mm. So you have a picture of that person, but until you can really say their name, figure out who they were, you really don't have a good way to relate to that person, especially if it's someone in your family, right?
Or even if it's not. I mean, you don't even know, and it could even be a family portrait, but it could be shot on a different continent, and you'd have no way of ascertaining that unless there's some item in the background that gives it away where this was shot.
Yeah.
So you don't know anything about these pictures, and a vast majority of the pictures that have been created over the years, since those first photographs back in the Victorian era, they have no identifying information whatsoever. We take more digital photographs today than in the first 150 years of photography.
Yeah. So here recently I had found a really nice looking tintype, and it was a husband and wife, and I can't remember if they had 6 or 7 children in the photo. Mm. And I just like the overall look of it. That the picture itself was not very good. There was some exposure issues, and so I brought it back, and I've had it for well over a year or so, and I pulled it out just before the holidays. And I got to looking at it, and there were actually names on the back of it. And I was able to go through like Ancestry and some of these web searches, and I actually found some of the descendants of the people that were in that photo and sent it to them. I dated it to 1881 based on the birth of a couple of twins that were in the picture. But I was able to send it to them, and it makes you feel good that you can return kind of an heirloom like that to somebody that really thought it was lost, and they can see, hey, these are people from whence I came, right?
Can I share a crazy story with you?
Sure.
a young man by the name of Chase Manhart during the pandemic was doing a podcast, and he asked me to be on the show right around when I was getting so much flack for capturing Jordan Peterson's photograph. And so I went on his show, and then he came and visited me, and then he decided, well, I would like to do this, Shane, and you know me, that's no problem, just come back. And he lives in South Dakota, so he made like 5 or 6 trips back, and I ended up showing this young kid how to make wet plates. And I've done this for, I don't know, 10, 12 different people over the years. And he was at a, and hopefully this isn't boring, but it's going down the what you were just talking about. He was at a antique store, and he saw this he had like 200 tintypes that he could have picked from, right? All in the little brass frames and all that stuff. And he says, well, what are they valued at? And I asked him, what are they asking? And they were only asking like $20 a piece. And I said, you can't go wrong at $20 a piece. You're not being robbed. If you like the image, pick out a couple that you like and buy them. You just can't go wrong at $20, right?
Yeah.
If they were saying $200, $300, that's a totally different scenario. But $20, I mean, what's going wrong? So he picked out a couple from all these hundreds of plates. So he comes in, bouncing into the studio the next time he had to have another lesson with me. And he was so proud of this portrait. He showed it to me, this tintype that he was during that conversation that we had. And I said, well, what would be really interesting is if we open this up and we get the name of the people or the person that's in the photograph, or we find out who the photographer is.
Sure. Yeah.
I've got many of them here, and I've opened up all of them, and I've never found any information.
Yeah.
So he was just like, so we had this little treasure chest in front of us.
Yep.
So I wanted to clean it for him too. You could see that there was some dust between the glass and the plate and stuff, and so I wanted to make sure, take it out and check it over and make sure that it was a tintype, not an ambrotype or anything like that. And so I meticulously took this apart very carefully for him, and we cleaned it, and we turned it over, and there was a business card, and the photographer's name was Chase. The same name as the young kid that had picked out this wet plate from hundreds of other wet plates.
Yep.
And so then he went down this rabbit hole of finding what the studio looked like, and finding everything he could about this. I mean, what's the coincidence of that? Oh, yeah,
that's fantastic.
And I said that right before he opened it up. I said, we could possibly find out who the photographer is, and the photographer's name was Chase.
That's amazing.
It's just like goosebumps. So hopefully that wasn't a boring story.
I have never been that lucky. I mean, I have tons of examples of vintage DAGs and ambrotypes and tintypes, and some in cases and some not.
I want to find a love letter. You know what I mean? Like I want to find or a poem.
Yeah,
that's what I want to find.
A couple of weeks ago, my wife was walking through a store, and she's like, "Oh, you got to come look at this." And it was a postmortem of a young girl. Mm-hmm. It was a DAG in a really nice kind of octagon case. And I'm like, okay, I got to get it. And then I get to look and I find another one of the same girl in a different case right next to it. And I'm like, okay, I got to get both of these, So I'm bringing this home, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to crack this thing open, and there's going to be a lock of hair. There's going to be some names, right. And there's nothing.
Nothing, yeah. Well, I think photographers are just trying, you know what I mean? It was a job. This was their profession, and they were just trying to make money. And how could they have thought, well, someone in 2023 would be interested, you know what I mean? Like, how would they have perceived, where this would go, and how photography would change, and how these original documents would become significant,
Yep.
They were just trying to, give me my 50 cents or 25 cents and here's your work, and thank you. At least that's what I kind of think.
Yeah. And I would say that the typical person back then was probably afraid to mess with that little case too much. They weren't going to take it apart and try and stuff something behind it. So
no, absolutely.
Okay, so let's switch over. Let's talk about your studio. So tell everybody that's listening here, talk about your studio. What does your dark room look like? Is there anything unique about it? And I know there is, especially for your studio.
Oh yeah.
So talk about that.
I had known, I operated the studio in what I call my makeshift studio, which was a warehouse with no windows, that first studio that you came into. And obviously we're using continuous bulbs, and there's, and I had no natural light. And there was one day the summer came around, and it was like, I'm going to go outside and take a picture of my mom outside in the sunlight. So I put her on a chair in the middle of the field, and took this picture of her. And something about that portrait, I realized that this process wants natural light. Like, you can do flash and you can do continuous bulbs, and I do if I'm doing portraits at night, and I still bolster, depending on what time of the year, some of the natural light. I'll put one continuous bulb on just to kind of do some different lighting effects. But it occurred to me that the tonality and the presence of the wet plate was so much more significant and more beautiful using natural sunlight. And it occurred to me that I need to look into what they did, 150 years ago in these natural light studios. So Dr. Raymer, I think it's Felix Raymer, wrote a definitive book. You can get on Amazon. It's one of those historic books that you can get for like $8. They just print them just because of its historical value.
Yep.
So Dr. Raymer in 1906 wrote the definitive book on building the best natural light photography studio. And in this book, there was all kinds of diagrams of window designs and stuff. And so I read this book and I went through it and I looked and I picked out a window, and I copied the dimensions of the window and the pitch of the window and the size of the window. And then once I had that, I just, on a napkin, I designed the studio around that window. I learned that you want northern facing light. It's always referred light. There's no, there's no direct sunlight. Only a couple of times during the year, one time during the year, does light come through and hit like up on the high ceiling. You'll see actually direct sunlight, but no direct sunlight ever comes into this space. And it's this beautiful referred light. And I used his book, and I had already been practicing for probably 4 years at the time. So I knew enough about what I wanted in my studio. And I thought, well, if I build this damn thing and it's not what I wanted, I got nobody to blame but myself. So, I designed the dark room and where everything was going to go and my workflow and where the dressing room was going to be. And I had to have a supply area and where I was going to finish stuff. And then I wanted a bunch of bookshelves and then I wanted special shelving so that I could display hundreds of my 8x10 black glass ambrotypes. You walk in the front door of the studio and there's just walls of my original works and it's kind of like an exhibition, but it's a revolving exhibition. So I'm always constantly editing. So I'll make a new plate. I'll look at the wall and say, okay, that one's about time. That one's been up there for a couple of years. I take it down. I put the new one in. So it's always, so if you come in, it just changes like the seasons and there's always something new up on the wall.
So I know you do a lot of storage and donations with the state historical archive, but do you have another, like as you go through and rotate some of your ambrotypes that you've got there in your studio, do you have a location there at your house or some kind of storage mechanism for kind of keeping them safe still?
I've got, as of last month, I have 60 museums that are presently curating my work. I've got a huge gun safe in the storage area where everything's if it's not with, it's either on the wall or it's in the safe or it's at a museum. So that's where or it's in the hands of one of my sitters that I had commissioned a work or I had gifted them a plate or something. So
sure. Yep.
That's where it's all good. So the stuff that gets rotated off the walls goes into the safe immediately. And it's waterproof and fireproof and stuff. So, and then I think once I get that safe filled up, I'll just start. In my will, I'm gifting my entire collection of plates to the State Historical Society. They have about 800 plates as of right now. Most of them by Native American series called Northern Plains Native Americans: A Modern Wetplate Perspective. I'm doing a 4-book series. I'm halfway through that series. 2 books have been produced, but they take my creative work as well. It was a really interesting, I don't know if it's interesting, but when they first started taking, they took my wet plate called Eternal Field of Ernie LaPointe, the great-grandson of Sitting Bull. Yep. Was the first plate that knocked down the door for my first museum. So my state archive was my first museum that I'd ever given my work to, and I have works at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress and the Pitts Rivers Museum over in the UK and the Royal Photographic Society, just to name a few. But they'd have to have a review committee, so I would make a couple of Native American plates, and then they would review it, and they'd have to say, okay, because it's expensive to store these things and to curate. Right. We're protecting these for a long time. Yep. So it's not just like I don't know of any other photographer. I know of no other photographer that has their state archive will just take their work when they make it. But it wasn't always that way for me. So this is where I'm going with the story real quick. Something I don't know if I've discussed before, but so they had to have this review committee, and they all, they'd say, okay, yeah, we can take that plate, we can take that plate. So then I took that photograph of Evander Holyfield, and they found out that it went to the Smithsonian Institute. So the Smithsonian sent a climate-controlled van to truck to North Dakota to collect this plate from me. And the following Monday, I think they got the plate on a Thursday, and the State Historical Society, they're really great people, and they're my friends up there. But they had heard about this acquisition by the Smithsonian. So on Monday, I got an email from the director that said, Mr. Balkowitsch, by the way, the North Dakota State Historical Society will take any works that you want to donate at any time going forward. And then the door was open to where I could get some of my creative work, like my large collaborations and stuff like that, pictures of the mayor and pictures of my family and, other significant people around, because that's what photographers did back then, right? You take a picture of the butcher, take a picture of the librarian, the ironsmith or something like that, or the guy that ran the boat down by the river. I mean, those are the things that photographers do. So I do try to, invite people to my studio that have these interesting jobs or places in our society in modern day, trying to fill those shoes and try to follow in some of my previous wetplate brothers and sisters, what they've done in the past. And what they've done a lot of times is they take a picture of the banker or the governor and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That brings up a point. I was going to ask you if you had a least favorite subject to photograph. And I'll give you an example. One that I don't want to say that I struggle with, but I never really look forward to it, is photographing young children, infants. But I've taken some fantastic shots just because I got really lucky. They held still for just the right amount. They didn't move out of my focal plane, and I got some really wonderful stuff. But I never look forward to it.
I don't know if I get, and like when I take, there's so much intent involved when I'm trying to create. So there's a lot of thought going into it. So I would never shoot something that I was not like. If I knew the subject wasn't something that if I was to say the least thing, the photograph for me would be someone in a white dress or a white shirt or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I try to avoid, especially in my natural light studio, because how things blow out and stuff. But
sure.
As far as subject matters, I don't point my camera at anything that I really want to capture, and it is difficult. I've captured a bunch of sleeping Native American children in their little baskets and stuff, and it's difficult. It's difficult, yep. And if they move, and then you don't get to see the details on their face, and so children are tough. But I've had a lot of practice. My daughter, both my daughters, their entire lives, their dad's been practicing photography. So I've got a picture just 5 feet from me of my daughter when she was 2 and my other daughter was 4. So they were just laying down with their eyes closed because they couldn't handle not blinking. But there's I just try to stay away from whites. Bright whites.
Yep.
Is something I try to avoid.
What about let's talk about cameras. So what kind of gear did you start with versus what do you use today?
Started my first exposure with the Star Camera Company 5x7. He's since gone out of business and no longer makes cameras. I started with an old Petzval lens, brass lens, which is really slow and it wasn't sharp at all. And then I had a friend, a wetplate brother online I only have one person that had ever. John Coffer was my mentor from the book, that's to say, but he's never given me personal advice, other than I should be using cyanide instead of hypo or rapid fix. Yeah. That's the only advice he's ever given me. But he, through his book, I was mentored by John Coffer. But Andreas Ray from Germany, are you familiar with him?
Yep.
Okay, so Andreas Ray from Germany, he came to my aid very early on and helped me with lighting. I mean, there was probably, and Chad, I'm not ashamed to say it, I bet there was 6 months, my first 6 months of photography, I did not realize I was using light to make the picture. Like I knew I had the lights turned on, right? These continuous bulbs.
Yeah.
But I didn't. Do you know what I'm saying? I didn't understand that I can move that light here. All I was worried about was getting a picture.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get some kind of resemblance. And then you start to figure, I moved that fixture back 3 feet, and look what happens to the shadows on that side. Or I move it over here, and I move it over there. And so it took me like 6 months. I mean, that's how naive I was about photography. I didn't even realize that this was a concept that you're painting with light. So Andreas Ray came to my aid with some lighting tips. And then he said, Shane, why don't you try, he's from Germany, and he says, why don't you try a Carl Zeiss Tessar lens? And he found one on eBay for me and sent it over. I can't remember. It was one of the smaller sizes, just to cover my 5x7.
Yeah.
And I've bought all the sizes of the Carl Zeiss Tessars, and I mounted that lens and I took that first exposure, and that was it. I've never changed lens.
Probably sharp as a tack too, right?
It'll cut you like a knife, like a razor blade. It's so sharp. And that's just personal preference as well. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know your personal preference until it's upon you, and then you go, I like this a lot better. So there's this connection to me with this super sharp made in Germany lens. So then I went out, because I had at that time, by that time I had multiple size cameras. I was going to 5x7s, 8x10s, and I even had like a 14x14 at one point. And I got 5 different sizes of this lens. All the f4.5 is wide open. They're made in like the 1980s, so they're not antique lenses, but they're vintage lenses, which they call now. And there's actually some Carl Zeiss Tessar vintage lens groups on Facebook, so ever since then, I'm a one-trick pony. I'm a simpleton. I have other lenses here that I could use, and I don't use them. I can't get away from it, and I hope, like when I was a golfer, and I haven't golfed since I picked up photography, but when I was a golfer, I used the same putter for like 15 years, and there was something about having that one tool in your hand. And there was new technology. Putters came out, right? I mean, they're always changing putters. I don't know if you golf, but there's always something new on the market that's coming out. This is better. And you just forget about all that, and you just stick with your old putter. And there's something about, you just hold it enough times, you swing it enough times, you take the shutter off enough times, you create with this one tool, and a putter's no different than a lens, it's a tool, and you create with this one tool long enough, and I've always thought that you could possibly get better. Like 10 years, 15 years into using that same tool, at that point you should have mastered that tool. Yeah. And that's kind of my mindset, and that's why I don't change lenses. I know some wet plate photographers change lenses like underwear, but what I think you see in my work, and I hope, and I've been told this, but I hope people see in my work, is there's a consistency.
Yep.
That you see my work, and you don't even have to see my name, and you realize, if you know who I am and you're familiar with some of my work, you just, if you're scrolling on Facebook, you see it, you obviously know it's my work immediately, and there's value to that for me as an artist, that it's a little bit more than style. It's it's a little bit more than lighting. It's a little bit more than composition. There's all these, and even the lens comes into play on what makes you unique in this world. And I hope I'm able to achieve that with using that same damn lens.
Yeah. Well, it definitely removes one of the variables, right? I mean, we have enough stuff to deal with between the chemistry and the lighting and somebody moving a centimeter. Let's get one thing that's a constant.
And exposure times, every lens has different exposure times. They're all going to react differently. So you get that lens, your eyes are my light meter, right? Yep. My eyes are my light meter. Always have been. Even when I went to Slovenia and took that picture of Brut Petrolin, my eyes are my light meter. And so I have a lens, and my eyes become this team, right? Like, I know that my lens isn't going to let me down at f4.5, and I know I'll go outside. I'm f11, f8. I know that lens, and I know the light with my eyes. So melding my aptitude with my vision, and just experiencing the light, understanding, like, I can go from my natural light studio in the workspace into my dark room, and I come back 3 minutes later, and I can tell you that the light's changed, that a cloud came in or something's changed, that I'm that in tune with the light in this place. So it's really something that I wasn't expecting. But when you're paying attention so closely, it's amazing what you're able to achieve. And it's all about that one variable. That lens is it's a consistency. It
Yep.
does what it's supposed to do every time for you, and then you only have to worry about making the judgment call.
All the other 10 things, right?
Yeah, only 10 things, right?
So your newest camera, is it Red Molly? I think that's what you...
Red Molly 2.
Red Molly 2, okay.
Yeah, so Red Molly 1 was a Alessandro Ghibellini 8x10 folding camera. I never fold it; it's always open. And I had Red Molly 1, and then it occurred, I almost like dropped it or something one afternoon, and it occurred to me that that's not good. What if I would have broke this camera this afternoon? I would be dead in the water. I'd have to go back to my old 5x7 or something. And in all my studio work, unless the students come in, I have students come out I got 6 to 8 different classes every year come out from the university and the grade schools and the high schools and the junior highs. And it occurred to me, if I break this camera, I'm totally...
Oh, yeah, you're out of luck.
I'm screwed for that day, right? Or I'd be screwed for a week. I mean, you're
yeah.
getting this from Italy. So
Yep.
It was like, I can't have this. So I retired Red Molly 1 and upgraded and got Red Molly 2. And it's called Red Molly because there's a song, 57 Vincent, I want to say, is the name of the song. It's about a motorcycle.
Oh, yeah.
And it's about...
I'm familiar with the Del McCurry version of that song.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So there's a redheaded girl with black leather, right?
That's
His
right.
favorite color scheme. That's what it's. That's the. So my camera was named after Molly. His love that he gives the as he's dying, he's handing her the keys to that motorcycle.
That's great. I've not heard that story.
That's where. That's why it's always. That's why I like having new podcasts, because these new stories get documented, or these old stories that I never recanted before. So that's where it came. And then so Alessandro, we did some things, Fresnel back on it, and a knob for controlling the focus instead of grabbing the bellows and stuff. So, and we upgraded. So I got, but Red Molly 1 is I take into the field, and then Red Molly 2 just stays on the tripod here.
Nice.
And so if I break one of them, I just a couple feet away, I'm able to continue on.
So what's the oldest piece of equipment that actually gets any use in your studio? Do you have like any antique stuff that maybe on a normal basis?
Well, my tripod is from Italy, and that is about 40 years old.
Okay.
It's huge. It's 11, 12 feet tall. Weighs 550 pounds. I was trying to get, being creative and trying to get at different angles, right? And, there's normal tripods with the legs and stuff. There's only so much you can do. You're not getting 8 feet off the ground. Well, that's what I want to do. I want to get 8 feet off the ground. I want to shoot down on people. I want to do all these different angles and stuff like that. So I started looking into a tripod, and I found this tripod. I want to say it was in New York, and this photographer was selling it $400. And
Nice.
And he says, I got him on the phone, and he says, well, my wife told me I had to get rid of it. It's been in the corner with a sheet over it for, I went to digital, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and I haven't used it since. And he said, what are you going to do with it? Going to make scrap metal out of it? I said, well, I'm going to make wet plates. He goes, well, no, you're not. I said, well, I am. He says, and this gentleman, he's sincere. He says, no, you're not going to actually use this as a tripod, are you? I said, I am absolutely going to use your tripod. And he actually broke down in tears on the phone, that he was so thrilled that his old tripod that has been sitting in the corner is going to go to a photographer and it was going to get more life. And so what he did is he took it all apart for me, and he oiled it and everything like that, and he disassembled it, and he made a manual. He took pictures. He spent hours making his manual with his own time.
Yeah.
Made this manual how to reassemble it so that when it got here, I knew exactly what to do. And it arrived, and the foot pedal has some, the rubber part is worn out, and that's where he stepped on it for years. And, you could just see that this gentleman, why he had this connection. Again, back to the putter, back to the lens, right?
Yep.
Like he had this connection. And then I took a picture of it in my studio, assembled, and it just he was just thrilled. He was absolutely thrilled. And he spent that tripod. You want to know how many he paid for that? It made in Italy tripod. This thing is not one of those plastic tube ones.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've seen that one. I mean, it's
so
definitely heavy duty.
Do you know how many he paid for that back in the day?
No idea. I mean,
It was like $21,000.
oh my gosh. Wow.
$21,000 or something ridiculous
Yeah.
that he paid for that tripod years ago. And it sits here, and I've used it ever since.
It's getting good use.
It's getting good use, and he was so happy that it was that someone was going to actually be using his old tripod.
Great. Okay, Shane, if you had the chance to photograph anyone that's living today, who would it be?
Living today, who would it be? Probably Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, okay.
Bob Dylan. I think it would be fantastic to take Bob Dylan's wetplate.
So let me ask you this. Have you reached out to Bob Dylan to let him know that you're willing to take his photograph?
No, I think he's pretty hard. He's pretty hard to get a hold of. I had done, before I was a photographer, I had commissioned a painting called Desolation Row. So his song, and I don't mean to get too far off track, but it was me getting into this artist scene a little bit, where his song Desolation Row, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a narrative that it actually paints a scene. So if you listen to the lyrics, it paints a scene, and that scene would play back in my head, and I would imagine the scene. And I hired this artist, and it took us 3 years for him to do this painting for me. And over 3 years, every word of that song, Desolation Row, and people can find it, if you type in Balkowitsch Desolation Row on Google, you can see the painting. I sell prints. I've sold hundreds of prints all over the world. And it took 3 years, and it was me, and every aspect. So the composition of that painting was all me. Like, I decided, okay, we needed, a blind man. We needed the all the different elements of that song. And it's like an 11-minute song. Are in that painting. So I think it'd be interesting. But I did send Bob Dylan a copy of that painting, a big blown up one when I was done with it, but I'd never heard back. So I think he's pretty hard to get hold of. But Bob Dylan is who would be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll have to see if we can make that happen.
That would be nice.
Is there an idea for a plate or a series that you've got in mind for maybe something that you've not shot yet? And I think this is probably a good point to talk about your modern perspective on the Native American photography that you've been doing. I know that you've got a couple of books out so far, and you're maybe, halfway through that series?
Yeah, a little bit over halfway. It's called Northern Plains Native Americans, a Modern Wetplate Perspective. I'm 652 plates in, taking me nearly 9 years to get there. And people pitch to me all the time different ideas and different concepts for series, and I need to stay focused on what I'm doing here with the Native American community. I'm really committed to this. I've been adopted into the Hidatsa tribe. My name is Meshte Ekagoche. In Hidatsa, Calvin Grinnell, the Hidatsa elder, gave me that name, which means shadow catcher, the same name that Edward Curtis had received. And I've got this idea. I got to get to 1,000 plates. It'll take me another 7, 8, 9 years maybe. Okay. And then I have an idea. After that, I'm booked out about 7 months for these native portraits. So every Friday, most every Friday, a Native American's coming in. But I do creative work also during those sessions. So I want to do a book. After I finish my Native American series, I want to start like a master's work book, like 100 of my masterpieces, or not my masterpieces, but my creative work. I want to go away from the Native American, the documentary part of what I've been doing with the camera, and I want to get more into some of these creative pieces that I've done over the years. I want to be able to feature them in some kind of book, and I don't know how many copies of that I'll make available, but that's kind of the idea, is to keep my nose to the grindstone, and fulfill this promise that I've made to my Native American friends, and finish the series for them. And people ask me, are you going to stop capturing or photographing Native Americans after 1,000? Absolutely not. I just won't. At that point, I think I can just let my guard down a little bit and know that I put a pretty big hill to climb
Sure.
15, 20 years. I was going to only do 10 plates. The series is going to be 10 plates at first. And then I got to 10 plates. I didn't know, how am I going to find 10 Native Americans that I've never met before? Because I had no friends as Native Americans. And then Ernie LaPointe, the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, walked in my studio. And then I got to 10 plates, and then I was approaching 50 plates. I said, okay, well, we're going to really throw down the gauntlet. We're going to do 100 plates. And then I quickly got to 100 plates. It's like, okay, enough of this. We're going to do 1,000 plates. And knowing damn well that I was going to take myself some years into the future. And it's been the best thing that I've ever done with the camera. When my friends come into the studio and they can be complete strangers, but if they know me as Shadow Catcher and they know that I've been adopted in the Adopted tribe, they don't come in as complete strangers. They come in as my brothers and my sisters, and there's something to that you just I have a hard time putting words to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely a huge undertaking, and to have stayed the course this long, to have gotten more than halfway through it, and to realize that, hey, you are going to be coming to the end of it. I think it's says a lot about your creativity that you're even thinking ahead what comes next. So
yeah, and I'll just keep, if 1,001 Native Americans walks in the studio, of course I'll take their picture, and if I get to 1,250, maybe I'll make a fifth book. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I really because sometimes it feels like I don't have enough time. Like, I'm going to be 54 in 14 days. But sometimes, you never know what happens.
Yeah.
And I'm just finishing reading for the third time Short Nights with the Shadow Catcher, about Edward Curtis's life, the book. And he spent 33 years and capturing up to 40,000 portraits of Native Americans. And he had a much simpler process. With the dry plates, he could make 80, 90 plates on a day. But what that man went through, and he said, the quote was, when he finished in 1929, that he did not have enough money to buy a ham sandwich. That's how broke he was when he was done with that.
Yep.
And it was an amazing story. So I keep him in mind. I've actually got his 24 volumes. I got a replica of his 24 volumes sitting here just on the shelf. Chris Cardoza was a friend of mine. He was the preeminent expert of Curtis's work in the world. So every book every modern day book in the last 20 or 30 years about Edward Curtis, if you look in that book, there will be the photographs were provided by Chris Cardoza. And he was a friend of mine. He befriended me, knew about what I was doing. I would take pictures of Native Americans, and then they would say, well, my uncle or my grandfather was captured by Curtis. They would say something like this. And so then I would get that over to Chris. Chris would research it. He'd find the picture of the relative to the person that I was taking a photograph of, and then he'd send the family free prints.
That's nice.
You can believe that.
Wow.
And then he was supposed to come on the weekend that Deb Haaland flew in. I had my big first book signing, and his mom got ill, and Chris couldn't make it. He called me, I remember, just hours before getting on the plane. He was devastated that he couldn't make it to my studio because he wanted to meet Deb and he wanted me to take his portrait in the process. And then during COVID, he passed away. So I never had the opportunity to meet the man or to take his portraits, and it's a regret that I have that happened that way. But he was a fantastic guy. But anyway, he spent 30,000 hours making a replica of Curtis's 24 volumes, like to the word, to the page. Everything is, from 5 feet away, you can't tell it's not a Curtis.
Right.
And because the last Curtis full 24 volumes sold for $3.8 million at Sotheby's.
Wow.
And this book collection here cost me, I want to say it was like $7,000 for 24 volumes. But at the time it became available, it was like, I mean, where can I get this in, where can I get this kind of history? Like if you would have told me, oh, sign up for the Curtis collection and every book's $200, you would have said, oh, I'll do that immediately, right? It was a no-brainer. So I knew that this this collection of books needed to be in my studio. And I've had elders come in and ask to see different volumes about their tribe. And I actually had an elder come in. They had a question about the number of skulls, or there's some sacred skulls, and they know the oral history of how many skulls there were. I don't want to make a mistake, but just for example, the oral history talked about 2 skulls, but then some people talked about 4 skulls. So they didn't know about these secret skulls to this tribe, how many. So what we did is we got the Curtis volume off the wall, off the shelf, and the elder sat there and looked page by page and read everything and found out that it was 4 skulls. So Curtis documented 4 skulls in writing, and then at that point the elder felt comfortable that they could believe the 4 skulls, because he wouldn't got something like that wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's an invaluable tool, and people are able to come in, and I'm able to take it off the shelf and say, this is what your tribe looked like 100 years ago. And it's fantastic.
It's amazing that Curtis was such a forward thinker in seeing, a people that their ways, their language, even any of the information about them was getting ready to really disappear from history, right? And he kind of took that upon himself to try and capture that, to make it available to people. So it's amazing that even today that people are still going back and looking through that information as a reference point for their culture.
Could you imagine if you told Curtis back in 1915 that in 2023 there would be a wet plate artist capture Native American portraits in Bismarck, North Dakota? Wet plate. I mean, that was 50 years before he was even,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't, obviously he knew about wet plating, but I mean, he had abandoned that technology by 1898 or whatever when he started, right? So he had already abandoned wet plating. So can you imagine saying, okay, 120 some years in the future, someone's going to be practicing wet plating and still going to be able to find Native Americans still in their regalia, still coming in with their songs, still coming in with their food, still coming in with their culture. I mean, he wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah, he would have thought you were crazy.
And reading, finishing this book, I should say this, is that what I realized, because in 1929, when he finished the book series, he was forgotten. Like, J.P. Morgan paid him for all those years, but J.P. Morgan had died by that time. So his last volume got sent, and the books there's 222 full sets made for the entire series.
Yeah.
And they were just forgotten. Curtis was forgotten. So Curtis was forgotten, and the Native Americans weren't. It was like this crazy, like, he always thought that they would be forgotten, but actually what was forgotten, and it wasn't for years later, decades later, when some of his volumes started to reappear, that he got recognized again. But he actually became more forgotten than the Native American culture in some aspects. And I thought that was rather interesting reading through this book the third time.
Yeah. So speaking of Curtis, I mean, who are some of the other photographers that you look up to or inspire your work? Who are the ones that kind of come to mind?
William Mortensen, number one on my list.
Yep.
As far as my creative work, for sure, Man Ray. I love Man Ray. There's just so many photographers that we can draw inspiration from. But for me, it's Edward Curtis. Orlando Scott Goff was a wet plate photographer here in Bismarck, North Dakota, that captured the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull here. 135 years later, I captured his great-grandson here in the same city in the same process. So he's been an inspiration to me. Obviously, Edward Curtis with the Native Americans, but if I'm talking about creativity and stuff, it would be William Mortensen. What he was doing in the 1920s was insane. I mean, no Photoshop. I mean, everything was cut and paste and montages and his it was like a lot of witchcraft and monsters and things that were just otherworldly, that he was giving us depictions of, that nobody was doing anything like what he was doing at the time. There was the Siegfried Folly girls and stuff. There was a lot of that going around and stuff, but nobody was doing this dramatic scenery shots like William Mortensen. So he he's definitely my hero. To tell you, a small little, these coincidences that we've been finding in this conversation, Chad, you and I. So when I started researching William Mortensen, I found a picture of his studio, and his studio was in Laguna Beach, California.
Okay.
Well, I lived for 10 years in Orange County, California, and Laguna Beach was my favorite place to surf. I would boogie board every weekend. I'd get on a bus. I didn't have any money, so I'd get on a bus and I'd go down to Laguna Beach. It was beautiful there, and I would boogie board. It was called Black's Beach. Yeah, that was the name of it, I want to say. Or Crystal Cove there as well. And anyway, so this is years later, right? Like years later, I'm researching, just like 5 years ago or whatever, I'm researching Mortensen. I see a picture of a studio. Guess what? The surf shop that I would get different supplies for boogie board and stuff was William Mortensen's old studio.
Wow.
So I was actually in,
Yep.
It's right on the corner. You can look it up online. If you look up William Mortensen Studio, Laguna Beach, California, you will see a picture of that damn building. And that building, and I don't know if it's a surf shop to this day, but when I was in California, it was a surf shop, and I had entered that surf shop. So I was walking around in the realm of the god.
Yeah.
And didn't even know it. And this is before I even found a camera. So these are the kind of things, that these are the kind of things that seem very, very strange to me.
Very serendipitous moments. Yes, for sure.
I also, I have a story about my tattoo on my left shoulder. I got one tattoo on my body. I was 21 years old. My brother wanted to get a tattoo, and we went into a tattoo parlor. I couldn't decide what to do. I'm going to make this quick. And I decided I was going to get a sun on my shoulder. Had no idea why I decided to put a sun on my shoulder. And it occurred to me after making wet plates and building the studio is that why would you put a sun on your shoulder, but now every Friday you're using the sun's light to create images?
Yep. Did you put a little exposure chart underneath it for you?
I should have. No.
Okay. Hey, so just to kind of swing us back around here, I know we're kind of running short on time here. I know we're hopefully going to have a lot of folks that are listening in that are into wet plate. They've been experimenting with it for a while. What advice do you have for any newcomers to the craft, or even to seasoned photographers that are out there using this process?
Change one thing at a time. I mean, that's really, yep. I mean, if you're just learning, change one thing at a time. Don't change two variables at a time. You'll never figure it out changing two variables at a time. Look for someone who has time to help you. Look for, you don't have to have, it doesn't have to be someone in person to have a mentor or anything, or a teacher. And then just be methodical and just pay attention and listen and watch what other people do, and just immerse yourself. Start crawling down this rabbit hole. And I may be 10 years ahead of some of these people crawling down this rabbit hole, but I can tell you right now, I don't see a bottom yet. And people have asked me, like, when do you think you're going to master this process? And I've always said, like, maybe 30 years from now. Is when I've always kind of thought that it's not something that you can master. And I never want to make the perfect plate. I know artists have said that before, but I never want to make the perfect plate. There's always that challenge, and there's always that need to improve. And like when you started and when I started, we made some pretty big jumps, right? Like, our plates sucked really bad at the first, but then you made a big breakthrough, and then things started to come together relatively quickly. But when you've been doing this, over a decade, those improvements, they're small little baby steps.
Yeah.
And you gotta find what it takes to do that next thing, and to keep challenging yourself, and to keep trying new techniques. And the other thing is if they could do it back, even like this last week, I made another vignette portrait. If they could do it back 100 and some years ago, you can do it today in the same process. So just figure out how they did it, and just go ahead and do it. And it's more of these, you're adding one more tool to your belt, and it's this combinations of tools that you slowly add to your belt as you walk down this path, this creative path into wet plate. That's the only advice I have.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we visited one of the local art museums here in Colorado, and they have an exhibit where they are displaying prints by Pablo Picasso. And I know that you have a few different quotations on your website. I don't know if you know the one that I'm going to mention here to you, but a quote from Pablo Picasso is that the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. Do you feel like you are fulfilling your purpose?
Well, I don't. If you mean giving away, you can look at that a couple of different ways, but you could look at it one way is financially. I don't charge my Native American friends and sitters for this series. They all get free scans and prints of everything that I do. And when I donate these plates, these different museums, they aren't charged either. So the work really, the work's going to be here long after me. And, I've always thought if you can find a place for it, a place where maybe someone can enjoy it years later, that's really where the importance is. And it's also gives me great pleasure to be able to, gift plates to people where they come in and we take a couple plates. I keep my favorite, and then they get to take something home with them, and then it'll stay with their family, and it'll become a family heirloom if they have any, if they have any understanding. And everyone who comes, you've been into my studio, everyone who comes into my studio may not have an understanding coming in, but when they leave, it's my job to make sure that they leave with an understanding of what it is that just happened here. And so you can really make some connections, and it's all about the people. It's all about the people, and it goes back to the portraits, right? You're shooting people. You're not going up and giving a tree a hug. You're just there was this last Friday there was, and I won't say who or anything like that, but a portrait came to life in the fixer, and the gentleman just broke down in tears. I'm not talking just eyes getting a little wet. We're talking tears in my studio, and every time that happens, I don't take that for granted. It's like, when's the last time you showed someone a photograph on the back of your iPhone and they broke down in tears?
Yeah,
it doesn't happen. But there's something, and I'm not saying this has anything to do with my talents. This isn't me boasting that, my photography brings people to tears. It's not that. You know damn well what it is. It's this process. It's this process that if the person understands what it is that we're creating an object that'll be here 1,000 years from now, long after we're all gone, the permanence of that, and how many people get that opportunity to be immortalized in this manner. But I'm a hopeless romantic. I love this process. There's no finer photographic process on the planet. It's my opinion. And I don't care about color. I don't need photographs to have color in order for them to have merit.
Yeah. Every time that I bring somebody back into the darkroom, whenever this is their first time that they've seen this process, that brings me so much joy, just being able to share that magic with them, that whenever you place that plate in the fixer and that image appears, almost from nowhere, it's amazing to them that, hey, this is something that actually exists and that somebody figured out how to do, 160 years or so ago. It's just incredible to the novice that's not around it, and I guess I am so glad that every time I do it, it's still magical, right? It's not become commonplace.
There's something religious about it. There's something spiritual about it, and I don't know where that comes from, but there's something. Can you imagine what the Native Americans thought when Curtis or Orlando Scott Goff would come out of his dark room or wherever he was at and shows them an image of someone? I mean, it's magic today.
Yeah.
With all the technology that you and I know about, Chad. It's magic today. Can you imagine for a native tribe on the plains, with their limited technology at the time, what they must have thought that was occurring there? I mean, it was no wonder that they called the photographers shadow catchers.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let they had a hard time letting these plates leave their tribe, because how could my chief still be here, but then that piece of object, whatever it is, that tin or glass, has him on there as well. And that's why they thought they were, some of the reasons why they thought something was being stolen. That the person left behind is less of that person because part of that person went with that photographer in that box.
Yeah. Yep. Amazing.
Fascinating stuff.
Yep. So last question here, Shane. So how do people that want to see your work or even maybe get a photo taken, how do they reach out to you? What's the best way to get in contact? Where's your work at?
Yeah, if you want to find me, it's very easy. If you just go to Google and type in Balkowitsch, Balkowitsch, Wetplate, 2 words, you're going to get many different articles, and you'll get my website and everything. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Vero as well. So there's many places. Or if you just type in Balkowitsch Wetplate on Google and just hit images, you're going to see a plethora of my work and see about what it is that I'm doing here. And I just hope, I envision myself as an old man with a cane or something coming down this hill to my studio when I'm 80, 90 years old, God willing, and able to continue to make portraits until my last days.
I hope so. Hey, Shane, I want to thank you for signing up to be interviewee number 1 for this podcast. And hopefully we'll get the chance to talk face-to-face again in the near future.
I look forward to it, Chad.
I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's a huge honor that you asked me to be on your inaugural show, and I appreciate everyone taking the time listening.
Great. Thanks, Shane.
You're welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode and maybe even picked up some insights that will help you along in your own wet plate journey. I'd love to hear from you on who you'd like to have on in a future episode. So send me a message and follow our Instagram account at 10 questions with any feedback. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider. Thanks for listening to me, Chad Shryock, and my expert guests, and I look forward to you joining me again in the coming weeks for a new episode of 10 Questions.